Welcome back to this series of Dark Reading Tech Talks. Terry Sweeney here with Dark Reading, and joining me now is David Masson, Director of Enterprise Security with Darktrace. David, welcome back to Tech Talks. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Terry.
We're talking critical national infrastructure. Let's start by defining what is critical infrastructure or critical national infrastructure, and why is it important, and how might we recognize it?
Yeah, great points. Critical infrastructure or critical national infrastructure in nation states is effectively the bits and pieces, the assets, the systems that support the functioning of modern life, modern society and the economy. That's effectively what that is. And to answer your question about how important it is, well, quite simply, particularly in our interconnected world that we live in now, that's how modern life is. It's all these systems that support the type of life, the way of life, the quality of life that we have now. That's effectively what critical national infrastructure is.
Talk a little bit about how cyber threats to critical national infrastructure have changed since last year's attack on the Colonial Pipeline. That was quite a wake-up call for not just the energy industry, but
That's right.
Industries in general.
Actually, Colonial Pipeline was quite a wake-up call for populations and governments in general about cyber threat in general. It was a real one that caught everybody's attention. And particularly if you live in the eastern seaboard in the States, they suddenly realized that cyber threats, cyber attacks could actually stop gas from coming out of the pumps. So it was, a big wake-up call. Big wake-up call as it was an attack on critical national infrastructure. It looks like it wasn't a deliberate attack. It was somebody didn't quite realize there's the consequences of a ransomware attack on Colonial, but that's the damage that it did. Since that time, critical national infrastructure continues to have been targeted. Our governments have been warning us about this for quite some time over the last few years, but the warnings have got increasingly stronger, particularly in the last few months. But attacks have continued. We had an attack in Canada where power functioning in one of our provinces up in the north was attacked by ransomware. Didn't stop the power, but it was an attack on CNI. When the attack in Ukraine happened, the largest aluminum smelter in North America was hit by a ransomware attack. And people might remember that Bridgestone Tires actually had to shut down production for a while because of a ransomware attack. So these things have gone on. But in terms of the development of the actual types of attack, we're looking at Ukraine right now, where there's obviously been a lot of cyber going on against Ukraine's critical national infrastructure. And the worrying thing has been a rise in what we call destructive malware. This is where they're not trying to stop something in order for you to get it back by paying money or giving up ground or whatever. It just literally destroys your systems, wiper malware. This has been around for a while, but we've never seen so much of it used in this way to actually attack critical national infrastructure. So on the crease, but with a worrying trend towards destruction of critical national infrastructure.
What's been the government response to these threats to critical national infrastructure? Is there an entity or entities that are in charge of the response?
Very good question. Critical national infrastructure, because it covers things like energy, water, health, manufacturing, defense, government, the economy. It's got different scope in different countries. It's very, very diffuse. And in North America in particular, most of critical national infrastructure is in private hands, about 85% of it. So what we're saying when it comes to who's in charge, it's very diffuse and very diverse. There literally is no one body in charge of CNI in any country. And that's why you hear a lot of talk about public-private partnerships, and that's where the government often comes in. And by the way, it's also critical international infrastructure. An example of that is the electricity grids in North America. In Canada, ours are joined east to west, but they're also joined north to south. So it becomes international infrastructure. And then you decide, well, who's in charge of that? Is it Canada or America? So it's difficult to say. And that's one of the reasons why the response of governments to the current threats that we face, and I say again, they've been quite open about warning us about potential attacks from Russia on critical national infrastructure, has to be doing that, is actually telling people about it, informing them of the potential of the threat again and again, and then offering really good advice to them at the same time. And a precedent was set in the war with Ukraine where America and Britain, first of all, actually basically released intelligence and said, this is going to happen, and then it did. So it's one of the good reasons why right now we really should pay attention to those warnings from our governments.
David, talk for a bit about what governments and organizations should be doing differently to better prepare themselves for these kinds of dangerous attacks.
Yeah, government's attitude to this is often regulation, and there's always an element of carrot and stick. But there probably is a good case here for some more regulation. To answer that question we spoke about earlier about who's actually in charge, because you really want to know who is in charge. But some regulation, certainly what it should be in there is reporting, getting critical national infrastructure to report in the threats and cyber threats and the issues that they have into government. Why? Because government has a great understanding of the threat to itself, but outside of government, it's a bit of a guess. What is the threat that the rest of a country actually faces? But with good reporting, you'll actually get to understand the scale of the threat that CNI is facing. And if you understand the scale, you've got a better chance of then allocating budget, resource, and people to the actual problem. For CNI providers themselves, they've been getting lots of advice from Western governments over the last couple of months because of the potential threat of attacks from Russia. And a lot of it is really back to basics. It's back to things like, look, deploy some really good technology that's actually going to tell you what you've got inside your infrastructure. Because if you don't know what you got, you don't know how to protect it. So get some good technology in. At the same time, let's train our people to make sure they can recognize things like a phishing attack, which might be the thing that then leads to bringing down a piece of CNI. And quite crucially as well is actually, let's start doing a bit of planning. Let's actually start thinking about it as this is an issue. Now, I remember an American president once said, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Start practicing and get ready so you don't end up being the rabbit stuck in the headlights. And backups. Make sure you've got some really good backups for if things really do go wrong, you can start building your infrastructure back up from scratch again.
Is the Ukrainian attack the most recent sort of bad example of CNI attacks? Is there something else that's made the headlines that struck you in particular?
With Ukraine, most of our eyes have been peeled on Ukraine because of what's been going on there, and in particular the way that when the attacks, most of which have actually failed, Ukraine's done a really good job in defending itself. I suspect with a lot of help from allies from that kind of destructive attack, is that when that doesn't work, the Russians have simply fired missiles at something and blown it up. Yeah. They tried to take out Ukraine's telecommunications system. That didn't work, so they then just blew the towers up, which is rather unfortunate. I would stick to the biggest threat that we've seen is the fact that it's this move towards destructive malware. Literally, it's just going to break it, and that's it.
When you were describing it, I was thinking of the Iranian nuclear reactor that the Israelis helped destroy with what sounds like this kind of destructive malware that you're describing. Is that of the same stripe?
That was slightly different. That was malware that wasn't really designed to destroy data. What it did was send a command to what were known as centrifuges. They spin round and round, and that's how they enrich uranium. And they basically said, spin 10 times faster. And then they broke.
I see. David, I always learn when I talk to you. Thanks for joining us for this Dark Reading Tech Talk today.
You're very welcome.
Been talking with David Masson, Director of Enterprise Security for Darktrace. This has been Terry Sweeney for Dark Reading. Thanks for joining us for this Tech Talk. We'll see you next time.